I'm Eva Moreno, 31, a freelance designer and only child of no one particularly impressive. The chapel was supposed to be in Willow Hill. White stone walls, curved stained glass, pine tree shadows dancing across soft linen. That's what I booked. That's what I planned. But as I stepped out of the rented black sedan, heels crunching against unfamiliar gravel, my eyes hit a sprawling beige estate with towering marble pillars and a banner that read, "Welcome to the Barrett Green Union." I froze on the edge of the driveway, clutching the hem of my cream rehearsal dress like a handhold. The wind tugged at the loose tendrils of hair that had fallen from my bun. This wasn't Willow Hill. This was the Green family's country club. Guests were already filing into the arched glass doors under string lights that looked like imported fireflies. I recognized some of them, my fiancé's cousins, friends of his mother's, but no one looked my way. The valet stepped up. "Name, Miss Eva Moreno," I said, voice catching. "Bride." He hesitated. Sorry, your name's not on the staff list for today. Are you with catering, no?" I said too quickly. My face flushed. "No, I'm the bride. This was supposed to be at Willow Hill." He looked down at his clipboard. "This is the Green private event. You sure you're not looking for something else?" I was shaking. Just slightly. From the double doors emerged Caroline Green, my almost mother-in-law, in champagne satin and a smile as chilled as the rosé she always poured too early. "Oh, Ava," she said, her voice a soft blade. "I thought Nathan told you. We made a little change. The club was just more appropriate. You know how tight Willow Hill's space is, and we had more RSVPs than expected. You changed the venue without telling me it was all quite last minute, but everything's under control. We even kept your color scheme." She gestured to the peach roses lining the entryway. "More or less. I chose that chapel for a reason." My voice cracked. "My mom's buried 10 minutes from there." Caroline blinked, feigned sympathy, then turned to a passing server. "Can you grab Ms. Moreno a sparkling water?" I was a prop now. A misplaced decoration. If you've ever felt erased by someone else's decisions by a family who smiles while quietly rewriting your life, drop a comment or just say, "Hi," hit like or subscribe if family drama ever made you feel like a guest in your own story. I stepped back, ready to walk to the car, call Nathan, scream. But then I heard a voice behind me. "Ava." I turned. It was Reverend Paul, the officiant I'd booked months ago, in full collar and coat, holding a small envelope and looking confused. "I just arrived at Willow Hill. The chapel was locked. I called Nathan, but his number's off. Something felt wrong. So I came here. But..." He glanced up at the banner. "Why would they move the ceremony and not tell you all around us?" The guests were beginning to notice. The servers stopped. The pianist froze on a half note. And then Reverend Paul turned to the crowd and said, clear and loud, "You all realize the bride wasn't informed of this change." A hush fell. Glasses stilled mid-air. I felt my throat thicken. I didn't have to say anything. I was no longer invisible. Not yet understood. But no longer unseen. After Reverend Paul's voice sliced through the air, silence rippled out like a dropped stone. Guests turned slowly at first, then all at once. I could feel it. The collective shift. My skin burned under their stares, but I held my ground. I didn't cry. Not there. Not yet. Caroline cleared her throat delicately and stepped forward with an almost amused expression, as though this was a minor wrinkle in an otherwise pristine napkin. "There's no need for a scene, Reverend," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's still Eva's special day. She's just a little surprised." Reverend Paul looked at me instead. "Ava, did you approve this venue change?" I opened my mouth, but before I could answer, a second voice chimed in lower, wearier. Is there a problem, Nathan? My fiancé was coming down the front steps. He was in his tuxedo already pressed, polished, like a catalog groom. He looked like someone who had already rehearsed being adored. Nathan, I said. Where the hell have you been? He blinked, as if the question was too simple to understand. Getting ready. Why you changed the venue? I thought Mom told you. His eyes darted to Caroline, who had now clasped her hands behind her back like a debutante at a gala. It was her suggestion. The guest list grew. Willow Hill would have been too small. You didn't call me. You didn't text me. You just let me show up somewhere that's not my wedding. He gave a weak shrug. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't fully admitted until now. Nathan didn't see me. Not really. He saw a place setting, a neutral tone, a well-behaved accessory to his life. Babe, he said, stepping toward me. Don't blow this out of proportion. Don't call me babe. He froze. I could feel every eye on us. The wind had stilled, as if the trees themselves were watching. I turned to Reverend Paul. Thank you for coming. I'm sorry they wasted your time. Eva, Nathan said. Come inside. Let's talk about this. No. I said. You talk. I'll listen. I turned and walked toward the parking lot. I didn't run. I didn't stomp. I just walked. It was the most controlled thing I'd done in weeks. Behind me, I heard Caroline whisper to a guest, It's just cold feet. She'll be back. I didn't turn around. Instead, I got in my car, shut the door, and stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes were glassy but clear. I hadn't cried yet. I would later. But first, I needed to think. I drove to the one place I still associated with breath, my grandmother's house. Gran lived in a weathered cottage 20 minutes away, wrapped in ivy and silence. She never liked Nathan. Not really. Said he had too much cufflink and not enough hand. I never understood it until now. She opened the door before I even knocked. She must have seen the car from the window. Gran wore a lavender shawl and no expression at all. I told you, she said quietly. I told you about him. I nodded. Did you leave him? Not yet. Good, she said. Leave him slowly. Leave him thoroughly. I collapsed into her arms. The next morning, I sat on Gran's porch with coffee in one hand and my phone in the other. The wedding was today. Or their wedding, I should say. I hadn't called anyone back. My voicemail was full. Caroline had texted once. Still time to be graceful about this. Nathan hadn't messaged me at all. That silence told me more than any fight could. But it was the message from an old friend that made me pause. Mateo. We dated briefly in college, right person, wrong era. He was now a mechanical engineer in Seattle, the kind of man who never made you guess what he felt. He'd seen a tagged photo from the rehearsal, messaged, You look beautiful, but not happy. I called him. We talked for 3 hours. It felt like pressing on a bruise, and then realizing it wasn't a bruise, it was a seed, a beginning. And that's when the idea came. It wasn't petty. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. They had rewritten my wedding without my consent. I would rewrite the groom. It was bold, absurd, possibly insane, but I didn't care. I didn't want the flowers. I didn't want the cake. I didn't want the performance. But I still wanted to choose. So I asked Mateo. He was silent for a long beat. Then he said, Tell me where to be. I told him. We made a plan. And then I got dressed. Not in the dress Caroline helped me pick. Not the one she insisted would photograph well with the venue. No. I wore my mother's dress. a simple silk gown with elbow sleeves and a satin ribbon at the waist. No train, no diamonds, just memory. Gran helped me zip it. I called Reverend Paul, who had offered to officiate wherever I wanted. We met at Willow Hill. I stood at the base of the chapel steps, bare-armed and calm. The roses were gone, but the trees remembered. The chapel door creaked open. Mateo walked toward me in a charcoal suit and sneakers. He looked more like a partner than anyone I'd known. No guests, no choir, no buffet line. Just us, and the man who was willing to show up when it mattered. I looked at Mateo. "You're sure I asked?" He nodded. "I don't need a stage. Just you." When Reverend Paul began to speak, I let myself cry. For the first time, the wedding felt real. Not perfect, but real. And that was enough. We didn't file the paperwork that day. There was no rush. No need to bind it in law to make it feel true. What happened on the steps of that chapel was more than rebellion. It was a decision. An unspoken vow that I would never again shrink myself to fit into someone else's ceremony. After the brief ceremony, we sat together on the chapel steps. Just me, Mateo, and Reverend Paul, sharing lukewarm thermoses of coffee Gran had packed. There were no photographers, no flower girls, no applause, only stillness. A breath. "Do you think they've noticed yet?" Mateo asked, his voice soft but curious. "Oh, I'm sure," I said, looking at the phone I had silenced hours ago. I turned it face up for the first time. The notifications had ballooned texts from Caroline, missed calls from unknown numbers, and a string of messages from my cousin, Lisa. "Where are you? They just started the ceremony without you. Nathan is standing up there like nothing's wrong. Caroline told people you were emotionally unwell. That last one made me laugh, bitterly at first, then fully. I laughed until I coughed. Emotionally unwell." I repeated, shaking my head. That's their default setting for me. Too sensitive, too dramatic, too complicated. Translation not convenient. Mateo leaned back on his elbows, watching the clouds move. It's always easier for people to paint over someone than admit they never really looked at them. He wasn't wrong. When I got back to Gran's that evening, the wedding I never showed up to had already happened. They'd carried on, apparently. Caroline gave a speech. The club posted pictures. They even changed the captions to call it a family ceremony. Not my wedding. Their event. I scrolled through photos in disbelief. Nathan stood alone in one, smiling, posed beneath that cursed banner. His tie looked crooked, like he'd rushed to get dressed again after something fell apart. And then I saw her, in another shot. Nathan was dancing with a woman I didn't know, brunette, thin, wearing a pale blue dress that looked suspiciously like the one Caroline suggested I wear months ago. My blood turned cold. It took me a moment to connect the dots. But then I realized this wasn't just a switch of venue. They'd prepared for me not to come. I zoomed in. The woman had her hand on Nathan's shoulder, and her eyes weren't surprised or confused. They were comfortable. I didn't recognize her, but she clearly recognized him. Gran stepped in just then, holding a folded linen and a soft expression. You saw I nodded. She sat beside me on the couch. They had a plan B. Ava, some people always do. That doesn't mean you were plan A. Those words hit hard. Maybe harder than anything yet. I hadn't just been left out. I'd been replaced. And they thought I wouldn't notice. Or worse, that I wouldn't do anything about it. 2 days passed. I didn't respond to any messages. Let them speculate. Let them spin stories. Then Lisa called again, this time with urgency in her voice. Ava, you need to know something. I saw the pictures. Liz. No. You need to know. She told me what happened after the ceremony, how Caroline whispered to guests that I'd left Nathan at the altar even though he was never at the altar, not the one I picked. How they tried to make it seem like the other woman, Mara, a longtime family friend, was just standing in to keep things smooth. I laughed again. They used a stunt double. It gets worse, she said. Apparently, after dinner, someone from Nathan's friend group pulled up a video, not of the ceremony. Of Mateo and me, someone had spotted us outside the chapel and taken a clip. Us on the steps. The kiss. It had gone semi-viral on TikTok under the hashtag #NotYourGroom. Someone captioned it "When the bride replaces the groom" and upgrades. It was everywhere. I had gone from invisible to iconic in less than 48 hours. What did Nathan say? I asked. He left the reception early. Haven't seen him since. But Caroline is pissed. She wants a public apology. That's when I made my decision. I called Mateo. The press hadn't come knocking yet, but the internet had done its job. There were hundreds of comments. Some cheered me on. Some assumed it was staged. Others were angry that I'd embarrassed my fiancé. But none of them knew the full story. So I posted it. Not a rant. Not a thread. Just a photo of me in my mother's dress, standing on the chapel steps with the caption, "When you realize the venue wasn't the only thing changed without your consent. Nothing more." It exploded. Overnight, my inbox filled with stories. Women, men, people of all walks who had been overwritten in their own lives. Weddings canceled, jobs stolen, families gaslighting them into silence. I wasn't alone, and I wasn't anonymous anymore. I started a blog, called it Table for One, just reflections. Nothing dramatic. I didn't name names, but word got around. Caroline's reputation in the local community took a hit. One of the guests, an editor at a lifestyle magazine, reached out and asked if I'd write about the experience. I declined. It wasn't about revenge. I didn't want to sell the story. I just wanted to own it. Meanwhile, Mateo flew back to Seattle. Before he left, we sat together on Grand's porch, watching the rain slide down the roof. "I'm not asking for anything," he said gently. "I just wanted to show up." "I know," I said. "We didn't define anything. That was the best part." He knew I needed space, so he gave it. But he left his jacket. And a note. "Whenever you're ready, come write a different ending with me." I folded it and put it in my desk drawer. Didn't read it again. Didn't need to. The weeks after were quiet. Gran and I took walks. I designed a few small projects for clients. I finally picked up the sketchbook I'd abandoned during the wedding chaos. And slowly, the ache turned into air. I visited my mother's grave, told her everything. I didn't get the chapel, I said, kneeling beside the stone, but I got out. The wind picked up as if in answer, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel ashamed of how things turned out. I felt unfinished, but free. 3 weeks after the non-wedding, I went back to the Willow Hill Chapel alone, not for drama, not for photos, just to be somewhere still. The place was unlocked. No events that day. I stepped inside, the faint creak of the old wooden door echoing like a secret being told back to me. The smell of lavender and dust lingered from someone's ceremony days earlier. Light pooled through the colored windows, casting blue and amber patches across the empty pews. I walked to the front and stood where I was supposed to have said "I do," not to Nathan, not even to Mateo, but to myself. I sat in the first pew, my hands resting in my lap like folded paper. That's when the door opened again. I turned. Caroline. In full beige. Always beige. No color loud enough to betray a feeling. No fabric wild enough to suggest softness. "I figured I'd find you here," she said, stepping forward. She didn't look angry, Just tired. You were watching my location, I asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she sat beside me like we were old friends, like nothing had happened. I don't want to fight, she said. Then don't. A pause. The sound of wind brushing the windows. I just wanted what's best for my son, she murmured. No, I said calmly. You wanted what was best for your image of your son. And for yourself? She turned, eyes sharper now. You embarrassed our family. I laughed softly. You erased me. I just refused to stay erased. Caroline adjusted her sleeve with deliberate elegance. Nathan's been devastated. Nathan had someone else dancing with him at the reception. She was a placeholder. She had a name. She's not you. No, I said. She fit. That silenced her. I let it settle between us. I wanted to make it work. I continued. With all of you. I tried. I swallowed things. I let you decorate over me like wallpaper. And then you took my wedding and replaced it with a performance you could control. It wasn't personal, she said too quickly. It was entirely personal. I replied. Because I was a person. And you forgot that. She looked away. I stood. I don't hate you, Caroline, but I'm done pretending that proximity is love. She didn't follow me when I left. 2 months passed. The world moved on. The viral moment faded. The blog kept growing. People began sharing their own stories, times they'd been left out of wills, skipped over at graduations, pushed out of family photos. I created a small community out of absence. Something invisible turned into something real. And then, one morning, I got a letter in the mail. Not an email, not a DM. A real, physical letter. Embossed envelope. Thick ivory cardstock. My name written in pen. Not printed. It was from Nathan. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. My hands shook a little, not from fear, but from fatigue. I wasn't sure I had space in my head anymore for his voice, but I opened it. It read, Eva. I know I can't ask for forgiveness, and I know you probably won't believe most of what I say, but I wanted to write, not to get you back, but to say something I should have said long before the wedding. You were right. I let my mother run things. I let myself hide behind her. I thought keeping the peace was love, but it wasn't peace. And it wasn't love. It was convenience. I made you feel like a stranger in your own life. I saw the photo from the chapel. You looked real, not curated, not perfect, just real. I hope he treats you the way I didn't. Nathan. There was no return address, no follow-up. Just that. I folded the letter and placed it in the same drawer as Mateo's note. 2 truths, 2 men, 2 versions of who I had been and who I could become. A week later, I bought a one-way ticket to Seattle. I didn't tell anyone except Gran. You going to stay? She asked, sipping tea. Never prying. I don't know, I said, but I want to see where the road goes. She nodded. Then pack light, but take the red scarf. You always looked alive in that. So I did. Mateo met me at the arrivals terminal. No signs, no fanfare. Just him, arms crossed, looking exactly like he always had, like someone who would rather show up late than not show up at all. Hey, I said, dragging my small suitcase behind me. He smiled. Didn't think you'd actually come. I almost didn't. What changed? I stopped waiting for certainty. He nodded, took the handle from my hand. You hungry, starving. We drove with the windows down. Seattle's air was cooler than I remembered, but cleaner, like a place that didn't mind beginning again. Over dim sum in a quiet corner restaurant. We didn't talk about weddings or blogs or ex-fiancés. We talked about art, about bridges, about how Mateo once spent 2 months trying to figure out how to fix a broken elevator motor on a freighter. It was exactly the conversation I didn't know I needed. I didn't move in with him. I found a sublet tiny, sunlit, with floorboards that creaked like polite ghosts. I got freelance work easily. Word of mouth spread from the blog, and clients who liked honesty more than gloss reached out. Sometimes I saw Mateo. Sometimes I didn't. It wasn't a romance. Not yet. It was a recovery. One night, weeks into the move, I got another message. From Mara, the woman from the reception. She wrote, "Hi, Ava. I just wanted to say I didn't know. Not really. I thought I was doing Caroline a favor. I was told you'd canceled. I didn't realize I was standing inside someone else's story. I'm sorry." Mara? I didn't reply, but I didn't hate her either. She had been used, like I once had been. The difference was I got out. And she reminded me of one final truth, something no ceremony could change. You can't be replaced in your own life unless you give someone else the pen. That night, I sat at my desk, opened Mateo's note again. "Whenever you're ready, come write a different ending with me." I smiled. Maybe I wasn't writing an ending at all. Just a new beginning, in my own handwriting. It was a Tuesday when I first realized I was no longer flinching at the sound of my phone. I had left it on the windowsill, screen up, notifications blinking quietly in the fading Seattle light. For months before that, every buzz felt like a ghost of the wedding that wasn't another voice asking me to explain, defend, apologize, clarify. But now, I let it ring. Sometimes I didn't even look. Sometimes I just watched the light shift across the hardwood floor and felt no urgency at all. I didn't realize healing could be so unceremonious. That week, I was working on a commissioned mural for a small bookstore tucked between two coffee shops in Capitol Hill. They wanted something soft and bold at the same time, like contradiction could be made visible in color. I painted layers of overgrown vines curling into pages. I added hands reaching into books like they were rivers. The owners didn't give me rules, just trust. It made me think about the opposite of trust, and how much of my old life had been built on conditional kindness. Nathan always said, "My mom's just trying to help," every time she cut down my ideas in front of friends. Help didn't feel like belittling. Help didn't feel like suffocation dressed as support. But I'd convinced myself it did, because I wanted so badly to belong. Now I was painting for strangers and feeling more seen than I had ever been in that family. Around midday, I stepped outside to breathe. I had specks of mint green acrylic on my jeans, my palms stained like I'd been gardening in a fairy tale. I looked up and saw Mateo across the street, sitting on a bench with 2 coffees. He saw me too, smiled, didn't wave, just waited. I crossed when the light turned, walked up to him. "You stalking me?" He handed me the coffee, only in the daylight. We sat for a while, shoulder to shoulder, watching cars pass. No rush. Mateo had that rare quality of never needing to fill silence. He let things settle, let people arrive when they were ready. After a few minutes, he spoke. "My sister saw the blog." "Oh, she said you wrote like someone who forgave people without permission." I blinked. "I'm not sure I forgive them." He shrugged. "You didn't stop moving. That's close enough." I took a sip of the coffee. It was exactly how I liked it. He remembered. "Do you think they're still mad?" I asked. "Mostly to the breeze?" "Probably." "Do you think Nathan hates me?" "I think Nathan never learned how to feel anything until you left." That landed harder than I expected. Not out of guilt, out of recognition. "I used to want them to understand me," I said quietly. "Now I just want them to stop talking like they did." Mateo nodded. "You want to come by tonight?" he asked. I'm making risotto. Could use someone to open wine. Is that a job interview or a date? Whatever you want it to be. I smiled, stood up, tossed my coffee cup in the bin. I'll bring dessert. That night was warm in a way Seattle rarely was. Not in temperature, just texture. His apartment was filled with low jazz and soft light. The windows were cracked open, letting in the scent of rain-soaked pavement. We didn't talk about the wedding. We talked about his latest project, designing a pedestrian bridge that could fold like origami when not in use. We talked about the mural. We talked about how I used to draw cities in the margins of my notebooks as a kid, each one with secret staircases and hidden doors. We ate on the floor. No table. After dinner, I found myself looking at him a little longer than usual, not because I was trying to fall in love, but because he didn't ask me to. That was the real change. I was no longer performing intimacy for the sake of a future someone else had scheduled. Now, I was just existing, fully. After I left that night, I stood outside his apartment building for a few minutes, watching my reflection in the dark window of a parked car. I didn't look like a bride or a runaway or a symbol. I looked like a woman whose story was still being written, and I liked her. Later that week, I got a package in the mail from an unknown sender. No return address. Inside was a small, hardcover book. The Art of Disappearing Gracefully. No note. Just a paper tucked between 2 pages. On it was a single line. Sometimes survival looks like silence. I didn't know who sent it. But it reminded me of something my therapist once said back when I tried couples counseling with Nathan Eva. You confuse being tolerated with being chosen. I didn't understand it then. Now I couldn't forget it. A month passed. Then 2. One Sunday morning, I was reading submissions for the blog when an email caught my eye. The subject line simply read, "The Chapel." Again. It was from the caretaker of Willow Hill. He remembered me, said a couple had canceled last minute, asked if I wanted to use the space for anything, no charge. He'd seen the photo of me on the chapel steps, said it moved him, said he thought it might be healing to reclaim the space. I didn't know what to do with that. I thought about letting it pass. But then, something small and stubborn inside me said, "Go back." So I did. This time, I brought people. Gran came. Mateo came. Lisa flew in. A handful of readers from the blog who lived nearby joined 2 people who'd written to me, people who had been made invisible at their own events, their own families. We didn't call it a wedding. We called it a gathering. Everyone brought something. Someone brought flowers. Another brought a song. Someone read a poem about being their grandmother's last secret. Another stood up and said, "I was never my father's favorite, but I'm my daughter's whole world." I spoke last. I didn't plan it. I just looked out at the chapel, half full of strangers and half full of chosen people, and said I thought this place was about a wedding, but it wasn't. It was about a moment where I stopped asking to be included and started building something that couldn't be taken away. People clapped. Some cried. We ate cake off paper plates and danced barefoot in the grass. Not everyone stayed long, but everyone was real. That night, Mateo drove me back to the city. Halfway there, he reached over, took my hand. I didn't pull away. "I'm ready now," I whispered. He didn't say anything, just laced his fingers through mine. We kept driving, windows down. No music, just the sound of moving forward. Fall came slowly in Seattle, like a conversation you didn't realize was turning serious. Leaves changed, not all at once, but in fragments first, one tree on the corner of Pine and 10th. Then the ivy climbing Mateo's fire escape. Then finally, the maple outside my sublet window, where the sunlight began to flicker gold in the mornings. By then, I had been in Seattle for almost 5 months. The blog had grown small but loyal. People didn't just read anymore. They shared. They responded. Some told me about the weddings they walked out of. Others about the homes they left behind. I stopped writing as Ava, the rejected bride. I started writing as Ava the observer, the collector of quiet departures. One post titled, "The seat they took from you was never meant for you," went viral again. Not because it was loud, because it was too soft to ignore. That same week, I got an email from a publisher. She didn't want a memoir. She wanted a book of stories, narrative essays about emotional inheritance. She said, family, silence, choosing yourself without sounding like a TED Talk. I said yes before I could doubt myself. Mateo and I fell into a rhythm. It wasn't a romance in the cinematic sense. No dramatic kisses in the rain, no fighting in doorways. It was better. It was the rhythm of people who had once watched each other walk away and knew how not to push. He left sticky notes in my sketchbooks that read things like, "Remember to eat lunch," or that vine pattern in the mural. "You crushed it." I made him playlists. He never commented on them, but I'd catch him humming a track 2 days later. We didn't define it. But he had a toothbrush at my place now, and a pair of socks in my drawer. One night, we lay on my floor, heads side by side, our legs stretching in opposite directions like two hands of a clock. I used to think love was about compatibility, I said. And now I think it's about rhythm, breathing when the other forgets to. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I forgot a lot that year." I reached over, touched his wrist. So did I. We didn't say more. We didn't need to. I got a message from Nathan. This time, it wasn't a letter. It was a voice memo. I stared at the notification for a full hour before pressing play. His voice came through like it was stuck in a tunnel. "Ava, I don't know what I'm hoping for by sending this. I guess I just want you to hear me outside of paper. You always said I wrote like a lawyer. I don't want this to be that. Mom's furious. She says you humiliated us. But me, I think you saved me, and I hate how true that is. I loved you. I still might. But I know now that I never chose you. I just expected you to stay because you were kind. You deserved a choice too. That's all." I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, because there was nothing left to save. And he knew it too. Later that week, I visited the ocean. It wasn't planned. I just woke up and felt the need to see something that didn't care who I had been. The water was cold, brutal, honest. I walked barefoot along the shore, let the sand gnaw at my feet. There was a family having a picnic in the distance, 2 little girls chasing a kite that refused to fly, a couple sitting silently, sharing an orange. It all felt sacred, and small, and enormous. I sat on a piece of driftwood and wrote in my notebook. Not for the blog, not for the book, just for me. I wrote I didn't change the groom because I wanted revenge. I changed the groom because I needed to become someone who could walk into her own life unaccompanied and still feel full. Then I tore out the page and let the wind take it. It didn't fly far, just landed a few feet away. That felt appropriate. Healing isn't always cinematic either. Thanksgiving came. I wasn't invited back to the Green family table. Not that I expected to be. Caroline had blocked me on social media. Lisa told me they still referred to the event as the incident. Nathan had moved to Chicago. Mara, it turned out, had become close with the family. I hoped she knew what she was walking into. I spent the holiday with Mateo and his sister Camilla. It was chaotic and loud in all the right ways. His niece covered my jeans in cranberry sauce within 5 minutes of arrival. Camilla asked for relationship advice like I hadn't fled a wedding 6 months ago. Mateo burned the stuffing. We laughed, ate pie standing up, drank cider on the porch until our fingers went numb. After everyone left, I stood in Mateo's kitchen, watching him wash dishes, humming to himself. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Always." "Do you ever feel like you're building a house in someone else's ruins?" He turned, wiped his hands on a towel. "All the time." "But it's still your house." He paused, then added, "You just get to choose the furniture now." I nodded. Then I said it, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. "I think I'm in love with you." He didn't flinch. He smiled, stepped forward, and kissed my forehead. "Good," he whispered, "because I've been waiting for you to arrive." I finished the book in early spring, titled it Exit Wounds and Open Doors. The publisher called it raw and clean. I liked that. We printed 3,000 copies in the first run. When it launched, the local bookstore where I painted the mural hosted a reading. Gran came. Mateo came. Camilla came. Even a few readers from the blog showed up. I stood at the front of the store, holding the book in both hands. I used to think being left out meant I wasn't enough. I said, my voice steady but soft. Now I know it meant I was building an invitation that hadn't been written yet. People clapped. Some cried. Afterward, a woman approached me, gray hair, steady eyes, holding a photo of herself in a wedding dress from the 80s. "I left too," she whispered, 37 years ago. But I never told anyone why. She pressed the photo into my hand. Now I don't have to. Later that night, I sat on the floor of my apartment, thumbing through the photo slowly. It wasn't a symbol. It was proof. We're not as alone as we think. Not when we speak. Not when we walk. And not when we rewrite what was stolen from us. I looked out the window. Seattle was dark and soft again. Mateo sat on the couch, reading something. The cat we'd half-adopted blinked slowly at me from the window ledge. My phone was buzzing again, a new message from the publisher. But I let it ring. The light flickered across the floor, and I didn't move. Not yet. I was already home. Spring bled into summer the way a scar fades slowly, without asking for notice. By June, Seattle had softened. Trees hung heavy with green. The city buzzed with quiet joy, as if even the sidewalks had decided to forgive something. My sublet lease ended that month, but I didn't renew. I didn't need to. Mateo asked me to move in, not as a proposal, just a door left open. His apartment wasn't big. 1 bedroom, a small balcony, an old radiator that wheezed in the mornings like it was sighing on purpose, but it was ours. I brought my grandmother's red scarf, 3 boxes of books, my sketch pads, and nothing else from the life I left behind. It was a deliberate smallness. "I like this version of you," Mateo said one evening, as I folded laundry on the floor. "What version is that? The one that's not trying to impress ghosts?" I laughed. I used to think my worth was in how well I blended in. "You don't blend anymore." "Do you miss her?" I asked. Not for a second. One morning, I got a call from a producer at a radio show, one of those late-night human interest programs with a loyal listener base and soft jazz transitions. They had read Exit Wounds and Open Doors and wanted me to record a segment, not a promotional spot, a letter. They called it A Letter to the Moment You Left Behind. I didn't answer immediately. I wasn't sure I wanted to speak to the past again, but that night, I sat on the edge of our bed while Mateo slept beside me and wrote the letter longhand. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't polished. But it was mine. When I went into the studio the next week, the host asked gently, "Do you want to read it? Or have us read it for you?" "I'll read it," I said. "I need to." The microphone was cold. The room was silent. I began. "Dear Wedding Day. That never happened. I owe you a thank you I never expected to write. You were supposed to be the happiest day of my life, but you weren't. You were a mirror, And I finally saw who wasn't standing beside me. I showed up expecting partnership. What I got was performance. But here's what you gave me instead: freedom. You embarrassed me into visibility. You humiliated me into truth. You stripped away the illusion that belonging should be begged for. Because of you, I walked out. Because of you, I walked forward. And now, I walk with someone who doesn't require silence to feel big. So thank you, wedding day. You didn't fail me. You revealed me. Yours, Eva. When I finished, the host didn't speak for a moment, just nodded, then said quietly, "You're going to change people." But that wasn't the point anymore. I had already changed myself. Back home, Mateo greeted me with takeout and a bouquet of eucalyptus. "No occasion," he said, handing me the paper-wrapped bundle. "Just because I know you like the smell." We ate on the balcony, feet up on a second-hand table, as the sun melted behind the skyline. He reached for my hand, held it in both of his. "Can I ask something always? If none of this had happened, if the wedding went as planned, if you married Nathan, if you became what they wanted, do you think we'd be here now?" I shook my head slowly. "No," I said, "and I think about that more than I should. Regret not anymore, but grief. Sometimes. For the version of me that didn't know better, for the silence I wore like a dress." Mateo nodded. "I like your grief," he said. "It reminds me you're still soft." "I'm tired of being soft," I whispered. "No," he said gently. "You're tired of being bent." I didn't speak, just leaned into him, letting the silence be shared. A few days later, Lisa called. She was visiting Seattle for a conference and asked to meet. I hadn't seen her in person since before the wedding. We chose a quiet coffee shop tucked between two thrift stores, the kind of place where everyone whispers and the tables wobble slightly. Lisa arrived in a rust-colored blazer, always half formal, even when she didn't need to be. She hugged me longer than I expected. "You look real," she said. "Is that a compliment?" "It is." We ordered drinks and sat by the window. "I've been meaning to ask you," she said slowly, stirring her tea. "Do you ever want to go back? Not to them, just to the version of your life that felt more predictable." I thought for a moment. "Sometimes, but only when I'm scared. Predictability isn't safety. It just looks like it from far away." She nodded. "They're still talking about you. By the way, I'm sure Caroline told someone you imploded the family for attention." I laughed. "That sounds about right." But then, Mara emailed me. I blinked. "Why she's leaving?" Lisa said. "The family. Nathan. The whole structure. She said your story helped her name what she couldn't say out loud." That quieted me. She said thank you. Lisa added. I stared out the window, at a child walking backward down the sidewalk just to make herself laugh. "I don't need her thanks," I said softly. "But I'm glad she got out." Lisa reached into her bag, pulled out a worn envelope. "She asked me to give you this." I hesitated. "What is it?" I didn't open it. I took it slowly, didn't read it right away, just held it like a strange weight. Later that night, back in Mateo's apartment, I sat on the floor and unfolded it. "Ava, I was never the woman you feared. I was the woman they told me to be. That doesn't excuse what I did. It just explains it. The dress, the dance, the performance, they were never mine. I stood in your place because I didn't know how to stand in my own. Thank you for walking away. You gave me permission to do the same. I hope, wherever we both are now, we've stopped apologizing for wanting real things." Mara. I folded the letter and placed it with the others. Not to forget, but to remember how far I'd come. Summer deepened. The streets got louder. The world spun on. The blog turned into a podcast. Mateo helped me edit it in the evenings, both of us laughing at how awkward I sounded on the mic. I didn't try to be wise. I just told stories mine. Others. Moments of leaving and staying and learning to name your own absence. We got a dog. A small, nervous thing with floppy ears and the name Clementine. She loved chasing dust motes and hated loud buses. I adored her. And slowly, without planning it, the life I'd fought to escape gave way to the life I never dared to imagine. No altars, no performance, just rhythm, just breath, just home. It was September when the letter from Caroline arrived. Not a message, not a call, not a secondhand complaint through Lisa or a passive-aggressive Instagram quote. A real letter, cream-colored envelope, cursive handwriting as tight as her jawline. I stared at it for a full day before opening it. Mateo found it on the counter when he came home from work. "You gonna read it?" he asked, setting down his bag. Eventually, he kissed my cheek. "You don't owe her anything." "I know," I said, though a small voice in me disagreed. That night, once the apartment went quiet, I opened it. "Eva, I'm writing because I don't know how else to reach you. Everything I've tried has turned to ash. I won't pretend to understand your choices. I won't pretend to approve of what happened that day. But time's stubborn. Quiet time has shown me that maybe I mistook control for love. You were not what I imagined. And that frightened me. You were louder, bolder, more alive than I expected a daughter-in-law to be. I see now that I wasn't trying to include you, I was trying to absorb you. And when you didn't comply, I painted you as difficult. I realize that isn't just unfair. It's cruel. Nathan is still finding his footing. He blames you some days, himself on others. I suppose that's how growing happens. I don't expect a reply. I don't even know if this letter will make it past your doorstep. But if it does, I hope it lands gently. I hope you are well. I hope you are free. Caroline. I folded it, slowly. No tears, no anger, just a kind of stillness. Caroline had spoken her truth. Late. Yes, but not hollow. Mateo came in and saw the open envelope. She wrote, I nodded. She apologized. In her way. And you, I listened. In mine. I tucked the letter away. Not into the drawer with Nathan's or Mara's, but into a different box. One labeled, No Response Required. The next morning, I walked Clementine to the park. The sky had started to gray around the edges. Fall was whispering again. A woman sat on a bench, sketching children as they played in the leaves. She looked up and smiled at me. Beautiful dog. Thank you, I said, settling beside her. We didn't speak again for 10 minutes, just watched. The children shrieked with joy as leaves flew overhead like golden confetti. Finally, the woman said, You look like someone who left something behind. I turned to her, surprised. What makes you say that? She shrugged, not unkindly. Most people are rushing. You're not. That's usually a sign. I thought for a moment, then said, I left a wedding, and a family, and an entire life that never really belonged to me. She nodded, as if I'd said I left a scarf in a taxi. I left a son once. She said, Well, not physically, but emotionally. He was cruel. I stayed for too long. When I finally said no more, everyone told me I'd regret it. But regret never came. Did peace. She smiled. Eventually, after a long silence, we sat for a while longer. Before I left, she handed me the corner of her sketch pad, a charcoal drawing of a woman holding a leash, beside a small dog under a tree. The woman's face wasn't detailed, just gentle lines and shadows, but the posture was unmistakably mine. Underneath, the artist had written, She left nothing undone. I took it home, framed it, hung it above my desk. That week, I finished the second draft of my next book. It was messier than the first, less polished, more honest, titled Things I Wasn't Allowed to Say. It wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It was about motherhood, rage, shame, relief, the parts of womanhood that no one sends flowers for. I submitted it to the publisher on a Tuesday. By Friday, they called to say yes. And that same Friday, Mateo asked me a question. It wasn't grand. There was no kneeling. We were folding laundry. Clementine was snoring under the window. He held up a soft gray hoodie and said, "Want to keep doing this with me?" I looked at him. "I already am." "No. I mean, like, officially. Papers. Mail. Taxes. Dull stuff. Marriage." He shrugged. "If you want. Or just a promise that doesn't change when the lighting does." I didn't answer right away. I folded the hoodie, placed it on the pile. Then I said, "Only if we pick the venue together." He grinned. "No marble pillars? Promise." We didn't plan a wedding. We planned a dinner. 30 people. No dress code. We rented a long table in the garden of a bookstore. Everyone brought one dish and one story. There was no aisle, no vows, just toasts and laughter and candles flickering under the stars. Lisa cried halfway through her speech. Camilla told an inappropriate joke. Gran wore her red silk scarf and winked at Mateo like he was the luckiest man alive. He was. But so was I. Someone asked me, halfway through dessert, "Do you ever miss the version of your life that led somewhere else?" I thought about it. Then said, "No. That life was beautiful, but it never looked at me." When the night ended, Mateo and I walked home through the quiet streets. No bouquet, no rice, no crowd, just us, and the hum of a city that didn't care what our last name was. "I used to dream of this night," I said. He squeezed my hand, and I never got this part right. What part? The quiet after. We turned the key together, stepped into our apartment, where Clementine was waiting. She stretched, yawned, blinked up at us. Mateo kicked off his shoes. I took off the earrings I never wear, but wore tonight just for the softness of the clink. He turned to me, arms wide. "You ready for forever?" I walked into him, rested my head on his shoulder. "I'm ready for tomorrow." We didn't celebrate anniversaries, not because we didn't care, because every day felt new, and I didn't need a reminder of where we began. I just needed to keep walking forward hand in hand, barefoot, honest. There was no altar, just rhythm, just breath, just home. In October, I returned to Willow Hill alone. No wedding dress, no expectations, just a jacket, a notebook, and a thermos of tea that had already gone lukewarm by the time I parked the car. The leaves were dying in a beautiful way, curling red and gold like the past trying one last time to be beautiful before it surrendered. The chapel stood the same as it always had: clean lines, small bell tower, stained glass holding secrets like breath. I sat on the top step and watched the wind lift old petals into the air. For a long time, I didn't open the notebook. I just let the quiet happen. Eventually, I wrote, "I didn't come back to forgive anything. I came back because this was the place I thought I lost everything. And I didn't. I gained the silence, and I learned how to speak inside it." I closed the notebook, let my palms rest on the stone beside me, and for the first time in over a year, I allowed myself to remember the girl I had been on that day. Not to grieve her, to acknowledge her. She wasn't weak. She wasn't foolish. She wasn't naive. She was someone who still believed family meant protection, that love meant shape-shifting, that pleasing others could save her from loneliness. She was wrong, but she was trying. I whispered to her, not aloud, but in that sacred voice we reserve for selves we've outgrown. "You didn't fail. You just hadn't been seen yet." The publisher launched the second book in early winter. The reception was quiet, but deep. I didn't do a launch party. I just invited a few readers, friends, and Mateo to an open mic at the bookstore where everything had started. No photos, no hashtags, just stories. That night, a young man approached me afterward, shy, late 20s, holding the book like it might fall apart if he gripped it too tight. My sister read this. He said, she was supposed to get married in June, called it off 2 weeks before. Your words helped her not feel like a monster. She's not. I know. But no one else told her that until you. He handed me a note, folded small, taped shut. I didn't open it until I was home. Inside were 6 words, written in block letters I left, and I survived it. I taped it above my desk, right next to the sketch of the woman in the park. Gran passed away 2 months later, peacefully, softly, in her sleep, wrapped in the red scarf she gave me, the one she said made me look alive. The funeral was small, just family and a few neighbors. Camila came. Mateo held my hand so tight I forgot my fingers existed. After the service, I sat alone on the edge of her old porch swing, letting the wooden slats creak under my grief. She wasn't just my grandmother. She was the first woman in my life who never asked me to be less so she could feel like more. She didn't flinch when I cried, didn't rush to fix, didn't define strength as silence. The next day, I found a box under her bed labeled Ava. Inside letters, photos, little trinkets I had made as a child. A printed version of my first blog post, laminated. A photo of me at 13 holding a paintbrush and looking confused. Taped to the lid of the box was a note in her handwriting. Keep leaving things behind. That's how you make room for the things that fit. I didn't return to the Greens. There was no need to. Lisa still updated me from time to time. Nathan had started dating again. Caroline had reportedly begun organizing charity events focused on emotional resilience. I hoped she meant it. But I wasn't interested in revenge anymore. I was interested in gardening, in painting, in putting Mateo's name next to mine on a lease, and then forgetting whose socks were whose. In learning how to forgive things, not to let them back in, but to let myself move forward. One afternoon, I opened the folder where I kept everything, every letter, every voice memo, every clipped quote from readers, every draft of my story. I sat on the floor and looked at it all, scattered like a map made of jagged stars, and I started to sort it, not to publish it, just to understand. I pulled out Nathan's letter, Mara's apology, Caroline's unexpected truth, even the photo of the reception, the one where Nathan stood smiling next to a stranger in my dress. I placed them in a pile, then added a small handwritten note that said, "These were once the facts, but they are not the truth anymore." By spring, Mateo and I found a house, small, odd, full of light. It had a crooked hallway and a garden overrun with weeds, but it had bones, real ones, not decorative ones. On our first night there, we ate cold noodles on the floor and listened to the pipes groan like an old man clearing his throat. "This place feels like a beginning," Mateo said. "It is. Are you scared a little?" "Me too." We clinked mismatched chopsticks and laughed. That night, I couldn't sleep. So I walked out barefoot into the overgrown garden. The stars looked like a map I didn't need to follow, and I whispered, just for the air to hear I was never the problem. I was just never the portrait they wanted to hang in their hallways, so I painted a door and walked through it. And I'm still walking. The third book took shape slowly. It had no chapters, just letters, each one written to a different version of myself. The girl who kept her opinions quiet at dinner so she wouldn't ruin the night. The woman who said yes because it was easier than no. The bride who stood in front of a chapel that no longer belonged to her. The stranger who finally chose her own name. I called it Letters for When You Forget Who You Are. It wasn't for readers. It was for every future version of me who might one day feel small again, so she'd remember. On the anniversary of the wedding that wasn't. Mateo and I went back to the beach. Same driftwood log. Same ocean. Different selves. We brought Clementine, who chased birds she'd never catch. We didn't talk about the past. We talked about the color we wanted to paint the kitchen, the neighbor who gave us honey from her rooftop hives, the maybe baby we weren't sure we wanted, but weren't afraid to discuss anymore. I leaned into Mateo's shoulder and felt something I hadn't felt in years, weightless, rooted, real. Want to write one more letter, he asked, pulling out a pen. To who? To whoever you used to be. I took the pen, tore a page from my notebook, and wrote, Dear girl who almost settled. You were so close to disappearing. I'm glad you didn't. I see you now, and I promise this time, no one gets to rewrite you. Not even me. I folded the note and let the tide take it. It floated for a moment, then disappeared. I smiled, and we walked home, hand in hand. No audience, no performance, just rhythm, just breath, just us. We didn't celebrate the anniversary again, not because we forgot, but because we didn't need to. Some stories don't ask to be remembered in ceremony. Some stories simply become muscle quiet and permanent, living in the way you move through the world without needing to explain why. By the following winter, the third book was released. The cover was simple linen white with small black letters. No photos, no promises, just the title. Letters for When You Forget Who You Are. It wasn't a bestseller. It wasn't supposed to be, but it was passed from hand to hand, sometimes quietly in coffee shops, sometimes mailed in envelopes with notes like, Read this when your chest feels tight again. A few months after its release, I got a package from a university in New Mexico. Inside was a printed thesis from a grad student who had cited my work. She'd written about the psychology of wedding rituals, about the social costs of saying no when everyone expects yes. She quoted my letter to the wedding day. She called it a rupture of generational performance. I sat with that phrase for hours. A rupture of generational performance. She got it. Maybe better than I ever did. Mateo and I built a life the way other people grow trees slowly, with room for roots. We kept things ordinary. We grocery shopped on Sundays. We argued over whether to compost eggshells. We made up over burnt toast. And yet, I never once felt small in his love. Not invisible, not excessive, just placed. Like a painting hung in a room built to hold it. Sometimes he called me his lighthouse. Sometimes I called him my storm shelter. We laughed every time, not because it wasn't true, but because we didn't need metaphor to know what we had. We had each other, without performance, without erasure. On a rainy afternoon in March, I received an invitation. Embossed, cream-colored, familiar. It was Nathan's. He was getting married. To someone else. The card was formal, elegant, cold. A name I didn't recognize. The venue, a museum in Chicago. Neutral, expensive, curated. I held the envelope for a moment. Not in anger, not even with sadness. Just curiosity. Mateo looked up from the couch. Clementine curled beside him. Is that what I think it is? I nodded. He's getting married. You going? I let out a soft laugh. God. No. He paused. Want to send a gift? I looked at him, then smiled. Yes. We sent a copy of my third book. No card. No inscription. Just a sticky note on the first page. Sometimes survival looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like leaving. Sometimes it looks like writing your way back into the story. We never heard back. We didn't need to. A year later, I gave a talk at a small storytelling festival. It wasn't a keynote, just a 30-minute slot in a room filled with people who had also survived things quietly. I told them about the chapel, about the roses I never chose, about the wedding that went on without me. But more than that, I told them what came after the red scarf, the porch swings, the charcoal sketch from a stranger, the way silence became sacred instead of scary. At the end, someone asked me if you could go back. Would you have told yourself to walk away sooner? I thought for a long moment. No, I said, because I needed to believe in the wrong thing fully, before I could learn how to choose the right one with my whole self. The crowd didn't applaud right away. They just sat in it. And that silence felt like the truest ovation I'd ever received. I still write. Not every day. Not about weddings. But about choice. And rhythm. And how quiet can be its own kind of music when you learn how to hear it. Mateo built a small studio in the backyard of our home, said I needed a room that belonged only to me. He painted the walls the color of beach glass. The desk faces a window that catches morning light in long, soft slices. Sometimes Clementine sleeps at my feet. Sometimes I forget to eat lunch. Sometimes I sit for hours and just look at the old notes pinned to the corkboard. She left nothing undone. I hope you are free. Want to write a different ending with me. I never did get another wedding dress. I kept my mother's. I'll never wear it again. But I won't give it away, because it doesn't represent what didn't happen. It represents what I refuse to perform. That's the difference. Some clothes are costumes, some are symbols, and some are just fabric soaked in memory. The last time I returned to Willow Hill, it was to attend someone else's ceremony. A woman I met through the blog. She asked me to stand in the front row not as a guest, but as the reason she had the courage to walk into her second marriage. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't moved, but because I didn't feel loss. I felt wholeness. I stood in that same chapel where I had once been erased and realized something quiet but life-altering. I wasn't the same woman who had been told to wait outside. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was invited. I was present. I was known. And maybe that's all we ever really want. Not applause, not perfect endings, not revenge. Just to be known. To be seen without needing to vanish to earn it. To be chosen not as a reflection, not as a compromise, but as a whole, complicated, breathing truth. And so, if you're reading this, if you've ever been silenced, rearranged, or dismissed into the background of your own story, know this. You don't need permission to take the pen back. You don't need consensus to choose yourself. And you don't need a wedding to begin again. You just need breath. And a little room to step forward, even barefoot, even trembling, even now.